All right. I wanted to talk about pistons really quickly because most people don't even port their pistons at all, which is really kind of weird to me because the piston is the other part, along with the ports inside the cylinder, that create what you would call a valve, like your intake valve or your exhaust valve. That's controlled by the piston and the port together. So, at any rate, on the left we have 56 millimeter big bores, and on the right we have 54 millimeter standards. This is to illustrate a handful of things. Number one, on big bores, the left one of the top two here, the left one is not ported, the right one is. It's important to note that because because these big bore ones come with a 73 thousandths shorter skirt, that means that the windows are coming in shorter, so they're smaller than a regular 54. So you already have an impediment right there. And that would be assuming that a regular 54 is capable of flowing what you would want it to flow on a ported cylinder. At any rate, there's a ported 54 millimeter right there. That's from Saw Salvage. That has a 10,000, or maybe it was 15,000. I didn't actually mark it. Pop-up disc. You can see that I'll use zip ties for ring compression. I find it to be the best. Just put a good deal of oil on there, use the zip tie to peg it down, and the cylinder slides it off, and then you just clip the zip tie, and voila. Some things to watch out for. All right, most of these are Farmer Tech, and then go figure, we have the nice Highway brand one, which is nicer in so many regards, except the locator pin on the PTO side was off 3 millimeters, which made it so I couldn't use it, and I essentially just have a paperweight now. So you need to check where your locator pins are. Now they're going to vary from piston to piston, and there's no such thing as like what's best, because you might be looking for more space on your transfers or more space on your intake, and that's going to determine which you prefer. Another thing to keep an eye on is the skirt width. For instance, the Highway big bore piston allows you to go, I want to say 63 or 64% of bore for your exhaust port and still maintain a 2 millimeter seal per side. That is millimeters wider of a port than you can get with the Farmer Tech ones. The new J's brand that I have inside my current big bore build, that one's got skirts that are somewhere in between the two. All right, rings on the big bore unplated top cylinders with the large ring of death, where you're not running a top ring. You're actually gonna have benefit because you have reduced friction. Anything past 6,000 RPM, and the compression gains from the second ring are negated by the frictional drag. But with a chainsaw, we want power, strong power, below 6,000 RPM. Sometimes you drop low and you want to bring it back up while you're in wood. So I mean, it's not going for a cookie cutter. It needs to be really strong in the mid range. Cannot sacrifice mid range power for top end. Top end gains are nice, but mid end cannot be sacrificed. Using good rings will make a big difference, though. For instance, let's compare. I'm holding these tight at the bottom. This is a generic Farmer Tech ring right against a Cobber or Caber ring. There's almost an extra millimeter of spring on the 56 millimeter Cobber rings. So what I actually do is I use the less sprung Highway rings, which have a spring somewhere in between the Farmer Tech and the Cobbers. I use those for break-in, and then I swap over to the Cobber rings after about 2 or 3 tanks, and just do a quick piston check at that point. I think that's pretty much every. Oh, the circlips in the center. People talk about preferences between the ones that have the double ears and whatnot. Those make installation and removal easier. Not that that's tough at all anyways, But that said, one thing to keep in mind, no matter what, it's going to have some kind of tail on it, and you do not want that tail pointed inwards because the gudgeon pin or the wrist pin is going to have lateral pressure. And the way that these work is that they're sprung into that little groove, so they're putting out pressure this way. So when the pin or the wrist pin goes into them, it actually forces them to expand into their slot. But if the little ear thingy is protruding in, then all of a sudden you can have it kind of trying to lift an edge. I mean, it should still push that down into the slot, but if it was deformed enough, and when it's when it's operating, it's really hot, which makes it more pliable. You keep the protrusion to the outside, and pretty much every single one of these will have a protrusion. So you just hold it up to the lamp real quick and see which way the tip protrudes, and make sure that's to the outside when you install it. And obviously on this saw you would install your clutch side first, just because it's easier to access the PTO side. But that's going to vary based upon saws. Anyways. I think that about covers it. Porting the pistons is not nearly as important on a saw that's not being fed through the bottom of the piston. Like on this saw, the crankcase is fed from the intake, and then it goes back into the cylinder through the base of through the center of the piston in part. So it actually really matters how big the windows are. That's not the case on all saws. So that's worth mention. However, even if it didn't matter, if nothing else, the aerodynamics, the decreased rotational mass, because this thing has to go to a full stop at top dead center and then a full stop at bottom dead center, and speeding up to over 100 miles an hour in between, and it's doing that hundreds of times per second. So aerodynamic gains, weight loss gains are both awesome. You do get increased displacement of the lower end when you shed material, of course, and that's not necessarily desirable. If you just put a big bore cylinder on the top, then you kind of have to do that to balance it out. So it works there. Anyways, that's enough for now. Hope this helps clarify a few things.